We may have a few people join as we go, but it is 1 o'clock, 1:01 Pacific time. So I'm going to take this opportunity to welcome you all to Eaton Aerosmith School webinar. I'm going to introduce right off the top Howard Eaton and Sandra Husel. And then I've got some questions for them, sort of our top questions that we get asked in admissions as people are looking at our programs. And then there will be an opportunity for some question and answer. Of course, anytime you like, you can drop a question in the chat box, and that's going to be moderated as well. And we will try certainly to get to all of your questions before we're done, and definitely have you wrapped up well before 2 o'clock. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Howard Eaton, the founder of Eaton Aerosmith School, and also Sandra Husel, our admissions director. I'm not going to do a huge introduction other than to say that, and Howard in his questions will probably introduce everything that I'm going to say anyway. Howard and I have known each other since 2005 as he was opening the first school in Vancouver, and Sandra Husel was already with him as his first teacher. And that was many years ago, and we're still here and going strong. And some new activity, obviously with COVID-19 and online opportunities. So I'm going to turn it over to Howard and to Sandra, and introduce yourselves. And then Howard, I have a first question for you.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm excited to be here today and give you my awareness and knowledge of the Aerosmith program, how it fits into all the interventions we do for learning disabilities or difficulties, and how it might relate to ADHD, and sort of give you my perspective on the field and what we're doing to help change and advance an intervention paradigm that I think is going to make, has made a huge difference in the lives of children and adults. So I'm excited to be here and share this time with you and with Sandra and Jason.
Yeah, and a big welcome from me as well. Again, I'm Sandra Husel, and I've been lucky enough to be a part of the Eaton Aerosmith community for the past 16 years, and really seen about 1,600 students these days who have made it through our doors and come out the other side very successfully integrated back into society. And I'm also the proud mom of an Eaton Aerosmith student. My son Sam, who is 9 years old, has just finished his second year in a full-time class here in Vancouver and is returning in the fall for a final year. So, you know, happy to bring that side of my experience to you today as well.
Great, thanks to you both. We're going to jump into the first question. Howard, we're going to try 3 to 4 minutes per question. I know that this first question might be a little bit longer, and we're okay with that. Can you tell us, please, why did you start Eaton Aerosmith School?
Thanks for the question. Being diagnosed with dyslexia at age 7 in 1972, I think my parents and myself thought the last thing I would do is start schools or work in education. I was going to be an aerospace engineer when I was in high school, and I wanted to actually try to get out of school as quickly as possible. In fact, I didn't learn to read till I was 12, and I was lucky enough to go to the Kildonan School, then located in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, under the stewardship of Diana Hamburger King, who was one of the gurus of the Orton-Gillingham program. And I was diagnosed in 72 by a child psychiatrist who was the only specialist in Canada who knew anything about dyslexia. So I had this chance to go to the school, and I learned to read. My spelling was still fairly creative, but I could eventually read, which saved me and got me through high school. But somehow I still struggled, you know, with written expression. I had trouble following instructions and lectures, and reading comprehension was still very difficult. I have to reread my textbooks 3 or 4 times over. So I knew as a student, and then as I went through university, that my dyslexia was still with me in a very severe form, although I had such great help with Orton-Gillingham tutors for many years. So, you know, my personal struggle is a big part of why I started Eaton Aerosmith School. And I got into education. I started as a teacher in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, teaching in resource rooms in Truro and Provincetown. I got my teaching certificate at Boston University, headed back to Vancouver when my wife and I had our first child. And I got a job at a private school for children with learning disabilities in Vancouver called Fraser Academy. And I started working with kids as a Orton Gillingham tutor myself. Again, a very rare thing for someone with severe dyslexia to be a phonics teacher. But I had perseverance and persistence. And then I got into assessment and diagnosing individuals with learning disabilities, working with psychologists. And it was parents who came to me back in 2000, 2001, who asked me if I heard of the Aerosmith program. And at that time, I had not heard of anything about it. And I had been trained that the brain was fixed and learning disabilities were permanent. So I was quite a skeptic of this idea of brain change and brain plasticity. But again, it was parents who said, listen, Howard, I'm going to go to the Toronto school in Toronto, Canada, and do the Aerosmith program, and I'll let you know how it goes. So I asked them, please inform me how the transition went and was it successful for you? What they did is they came back to my assessment clinic and we redid their psychoeducational assessments. And it was at that time that I saw changes in reading, which I'd seen with Orton Gillingham, Linda Mood-Bell. I had seen improvements with reading scores and spelling scores, but I had never seen changes in processing speed, working memory, fluid reasoning, visual motor integration, and that stunned me as a professional in the field, someone with a learning disability who struggled all my life, to see these changes in not just one client, but at least 3 to 4, was enough to raise my curiosity and actually call Barbara Aerosmith Young in Toronto and ask her, what on earth are you doing? How can you change neurological functioning? I mean, I was trained in graduate school that the brain was fixed, and that's what my professors at Boston University, as I was doing a PhD, professors always talked about the permanence of these issues. Even on the board, I served on the Canadian Learning Disability Association board, and we came up with definitions, and we always added lifelong to those definitions. So to see these changes was a startling moment for me, because I knew as well what it meant, that if you could change these cognitive functions of reasoning, processing speed, auditory working memory, that the whole ability to cope with our environment in a learning situation or a social situation transforms dramatically. And that got me the chance to phone Barbara Aerosmith Young and visit her in Toronto. And the funny thing was, I thought after I had left their school in Toronto in 2004, December, that if I started a school in Vancouver, all my colleagues would be excited that I'm bringing it to Vancouver, Canada. But I was startled to see that that was not the case, that the idea of brain change and abilities of children and adults with learning disabilities to transform their neurological profile was not going to be readily accepted by my colleagues. So initially, I received a lot of criticism. I was taken off boards of directors of Orton Gillingham and learning disability associations. And I began to realize that paradigm shifts, adding a new idea to already existing field, is very problematic. So 16 years later, it's much more readily accepted, this idea of brain plasticity through wonderful works like Norman Doyle's The Brain That Changes Itself. And now we're getting much more interest and much more curiosity in terms of what we're doing. But that's what really inspired me to start Aerosmith, was what I knew it meant for the child or adult who struggled with these issues, how it would change their quality of life, and that inspired me.
Thanks, Howard. A bit of a follow-up to that, you mentioned about people with learning difficulties specifically. Is Aerosmith program beneficial to anyone or just to those with learning difficulties?
I think, obviously anyone can improve neurological capacity. And unfortunately, in the field of assessment and psychoeducational assessment, we have categories and ways kids fit into different definitions of learning disability, whether it's reading, math, writing, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyslexia. And each province and each state in the US may have different classifications. And so sometimes if you don't meet that classification, you're on the borderline, or one might consider you a slower learner, you may not think that you can get access to programs like Aerosmith. But there's no question in my mind that Aerosmith program is for all minds, in terms of the aging brain, enhancement of the human brain. We've actually just recently brought this work into brain injury. I began a nonprofit organization called Watson Center Society for Brain Health, where we put Aerosmith into the field of brain injury and working with people with stroke and concussion. So the program itself, all brains are made up of the same structure. If you provide the right differential stimulation and cognitive exercises, all of us can be enhanced neurologically through training. And so I think it's unfortunate if the idea of Aerosmith is just sought for learning disabilities per se. I think it can serve a wide range of individuals. And we actually have done research in learning disabilities and in brain injury, and we actually see the same neurological changes in both brain categories in terms of the effect that's going on in large-scale brain networks and improving connectivity in the human brain and cortical activation in certain regions of the brain. So the effect is the same in all brains in terms of brain change. The rate of change can be different with everybody. Not everyone responds at the same speed using the Aerosmith program. Some children respond faster and have greater neuroplasticity, and we're trying to understand why that's the case. And some kids respond slower and need more time, and same for adults. So brain plasticity and differentiation of change individually, we're still trying to understand why some people change faster and others take longer.
Great. Thanks, Howard. Just remind our participants, if you do have a question, you can just throw it into the chat box and we can get to it at the end of the presentation. Or we can just do a good old hand up as you are most comfortable. Sandra, Howard was talking differences between neuroplastic program like this and academic intervention. Can you share with us why a person might turn to a program like Aerosmith instead of a more traditional academic intervention?
Absolutely. When we have our children or ourselves going through a path of education, we dream about this path for our child, or we figure that the path will be taking a certain trajectory for ourselves. And usually that involves an academic education. But when we get to a point where we're looking at how can we keep going in terms of learning when a lot of the barriers to learning are having to be worked around, eventually you get to a place where you're feeling like you might be that person sitting in the chair, or you're watching your child moving from grade to grade, but really not fully understanding the material or understanding it with gaps in between your learning, or the ability to express what you know, even though you do know it, just is not coming out as fluidly as you would like. And so families that really come to us are taking a different approach and would really like to see themselves or their child be able to navigate the academic system or the educational system without having to have extra support or tutors or be that support for their child. They're curious about what life would be like if you could actually get to the neurological root of what is causing those learning challenges and strengthen that capacity. So coming to an Eaton Aerosmith school or being a part of our online community, you're not working on a full academic curriculum, which to some may seem very counterintuitive. If you're struggling with reading, why don't you do more reading? Or if you're having a hard time socially, why don't you go to a social skills class and practice that way? But if the underlying cognitive reason why you're actually struggling there is not yet fully developed, then it's very hard to be successful academically. So families who come to us, students who come to us, are actually targeting and strengthening the neurological capacity, or their brain's capacity for being successful academically. That doesn't mean they're not going to do academics in the future. In fact, it means that they're going to be far more successful when they do transition back into a traditional academic environment, because now you're approaching learning with the ability, for example, to reason and make connections, to form solid opinions, to plan, to problem solve, to process information in real time, to express yourself in a way that matches the ideas that might be in your head, which all allow for a very successful path, and a path that is not only dictated by what your dreams are, but what you can actually achieve. Oh, Jason's muted. I think you're muted, Jason.
Of course I'm muted. It happens at least once. Thanks, Sandra. And I see that Aaron has directed a question about that transition, so Aaron will save that for the end, but know that we've received it. I'm going to jump back to Howard. Howard, you mentioned about research in Aerosmith. Can you tell a little bit about what has been done and what is currently happening and potentially what's happening in the future?
Yeah, that was a huge passion of mine, to bring more research to the Barbara Aerosmith Young's work, the Aerosmith program. I had been an instructor at the University of British Columbia, teaching in the special ed department, teaching teachers about learning disabilities. I knew the value of having research in a program if you want to get it into public schools, for example. And just my own curiosity, if I was to do the Aerosmith program, I wanted to have scientific research conducted, even more so than it had previously been conducted by Barbara Aerosmith Young. So I asked her, could I take a role in getting more academics involved in analyzing research and give these academics full control of their design and no interference from the Aerosmith program. And she was in full approval of that. And so I was able to get some key neuroscientists at the University of British Columbia, Southern Illinois University, and neuroscientists there to begin studying our students and wondering what is going on neurologically as they gain access to the Aerosmith program. Are we indeed changing the brain? And can we use neuroimaging like fMRI or qEEG to actually see changes and further validate the theories and concepts that Barbara has? And so roughly about 7 to 8 years ago, we got this research going, and now they're publishing these articles in peer-reviewed research. In fact, there are now been 20 independent studies of the Aerosmith program, over 700 students researched in 19 different educational institutions in 4 different countries, several publications, 5 had control studies embedded in them. And again, I wanted to do this professionally because I knew what it meant to be an academic. I knew how important it was. And I wanted to see the concepts that I was seeing changing in psych ed assessments, like working memory and processing speed. Would someone else see the same thing that I saw in scientific research? And speaking to that, and Sandra mentioned it before, these cognitive functions, like say working memory, if you actually dig into the journals of learning disabilities and you actually find out what are critical cognitive capacities for success in life, it's often not just phonological awareness that we need for reading, which is huge, but concepts like auditory working memory. Working memory is one of the most important functions for school and life and work success. And what I had known before was that you can't change it, that you have deficits in working memory the rest of your life. So when I saw these changes in working memory, I said, okay, this is a fundamentally critical understanding of what impact the Aerosmith program can have on them. So these researchers like Dr. Lara Boyd, Dr. Greg Rose, began to analyze our kids, put them in functional MRIs, began to look at neurological change that was occurring in them. And I'll just give you a couple of quick examples of the changes that startled me and really made me realize how important this program was. When we initially tested kids at University of British Columbia, and when I mean we, I mean Dr. Lara Boyd and her colleagues, they found that one finding was that kids with learning disabilities had underactive medial prefrontal lobe connectivity at resting state. And usually the middle of your brain, in the prefrontal, is quite engaged when you're just relaxing because you're doing a lot of planning and organizing and strategizing. What we found with kids with learning disabilities, they had a much more underactive medial prefrontal lobe. And the question is why? And my theory, and I think others are agreeing, is that because we compensate for children and provide strategies and accommodations and resource room, and parents are creating calendars for them and organizing their life, usually getting them to appointments, they're not actually independently engaging this medial prefrontal lobe, which makes them more susceptible to problems with planning and organizing because they're just not engaging that area of the brain. That was one thing that was really startling. The other thing is that we actually studied a lot of kids doing one of our programs called symbol relations, a term we use is clocks, where they're reading an analog clock, and it builds conceptual thinking ability, the ability to have cause and effect and reasoning. And I knew in the field of learning disabilities, a lot of kids struggle with this, and it affects reading comprehension and math problem solving. We actually now know, and we've had this knowledge for some time, that the area of the brain used for reasoning, like reading comprehension and math problem solving, is an association area of the brain that interconnects different cortical areas, like your auditory lobe, your visual lobe, your motor lobe, and it integrates sensory information. It allows you to make sense of your world. What we found with the symbol relations or clocks program is that even after just 6 weeks, that area of the brain shows way more neural connectivity and activation compared to when they started, and equals and matches the healthy brain of a child who doesn't have problems with reading comprehension and math problem solving. So what was exciting to me is that we saw this research not just at the University of British Columbia, but also by Dr. Greg Rose at Southern Illinois University. And so to actually see changes in areas of the brain used for attention, planning, and organizing and reasoning, and knowing what that meant certainly made me more comfortable advocating and adopting the Aerosmith program.
Thanks, Howard. Really exciting, and I know that that my eldest son was involved as in Dr. Boyd's study, and that was really exciting for us as well. Got his brain scanned. Thanks for that.
And Jason,
Sandra.
Jason, I just want to make one more mention of a finding that I think was really important.
Yep.
Research is now showing, and it's important for those who are listening, that we have what's called large-scale brain networks. And these are sort of like if you look at a wiring of a house, it attaches communication ability from one area to another area of the brain. And these are networks that communicate between different cortical areas. And research in dyslexia, dysgraphia, other types of issues like anxiety is showing that these large-scale brain networks have poor connectivity in those who have these diagnoses. We also found that in our kids prior to intervention. They had difficulties with what we would consider normal connectivity between brain regions in these large-scale brain networks. In the short 6-8 week program, that connectivity began to show normality or closer to healthy controls. So I think, you know, what's exciting to see is that not only are specific cortical areas showing more connectivity, but the networks that help us understand this world are showing better connectivity. One example, you know, being in this field so long, as a teacher, I taught in Cape Cod as well, Massachusetts, and in Vancouver, is that when you teach someone with a learning disability, there's often a lag in them trying to absorb the information and understand it. And one way to look at it is if the connectivity between brain regions is slower, it is more difficult for them to process it in real time. So they're almost processing it in lag time, and they're behind their peers, and especially problematic if they're integrated in a classroom of kids who have healthy large-scale brain networks. They don't have the time to process this. Their parents hire tutors, and the kids go in resource room just to try to learn it again because of the connectivity problems in these areas of neurological functioning.
Thanks, Howard. Sandra, one of the questions that we get a lot, as you know, in admissions is how we know if our kids or ourselves are a good fit for Aerosmith program, and when is the best time to join. Could you shed some light on that for us, please?
Absolutely. And as Howard was saying, anyone can benefit from brain fitness. It's, you would never say to anyone, oh, don't worry, you're the person out there that does not need to, move your body in order to stay healthy in one way or another. It's the same with our brain, and that's true all the way across our lifespan. I mean, we'll see students, usually the youngest students we see are families that are either looking to be proactive, maybe they themselves have had a history of learning challenges growing up. They're starting to see inklings of that in their young child. So a student might start with us at the age of 6 or 7, again, around that 3rd, 4th grade time when you can't rely so much on your memory anymore, but have to start thinking conceptually, answering those why questions, the what if, giving your opinion, answering multiple choice. That kind of a barrier comes up if you're stronger, or sorry, if you're struggling when it comes to reasoning and conceptual understanding. So parents will be curious at that time. Again, with the transition to high school, where the fear comes up is, okay, I've been able to support my child along the way when there's one teacher to deal with, but now we've got a whole bunch of different teachers and classes in high school. How are they going to be able to use their own planning and problem solving ability to get the assignments in on time, or to debate with others, or to make good choices socially in high school? And then again, at the end of high school, when we're looking at, okay, well, my child is very intelligent and could get into college or university, but they're supposed to be independently navigating the waters there. And there's some trepidation about that. And certainly we've seen a lot of students who start off in college or university, but then unfortunately have a very difficult time in their first semester or term because of executive functioning or organizing, planning, problem solving weaknesses. And then they will come back and take some time, whether it's a gap year or a program with us to strengthen those capacities. And then we have adults who are in job situations who kind of are feeling frustrated. I talked to a woman the other day who said, she'll be sitting at an office meeting and listening to her colleagues debate about topics that she has the answer to as well, and probably at a higher level, but it's a challenge for her to get those words out sequentially, as Howard was saying, in real time. And so she's constantly passed over when it comes to promotions and is feeling frustrated by that. Or you can be, a grandparent or someone who has a bit more time on their hands who wants to stay sharp, as age happens. And so that would be a good time to join the Aerosmith program. So really, there's not really a wrong time. What is needed is a desire to do this. If someone engages in the exercises over time at a particular level that is targeted to just slightly above your current capacity, those brain networks, as Howard mentioned, they are going to change, they're going to strengthen, they're going to be used more effectively and efficiently, but you do have to do the work. So that's one of our big criteria in admissions is this the right time for a particular student? Do they have the time? Do they have that awareness of why this would make such beneficial changes in their life? And then we can go from there and create a very individualized program moving forward.
Great. Thanks, Sandra. A bit of a follow-up to that talks about a typical day at Eaton Aerosmith, either in person or online. So maybe if you could talk a little bit to those pieces.
Sure, absolutely. So if someone comes to one of our schools, we have a school in Vancouver, another in a suburb of Vancouver called White Rock, and then another one in Redmond, Washington, not too far away from Seattle. Their day, if they're enrolled in a full-time program, would start at 8:30 and would end at 3 o'clock. And during that time, you know, they're surrounded by a community of and I know everyone would say this about their school, but honestly, we truly have some of the best students around. They are so welcoming and friendly. I mean, the staff, it goes without saying that we wouldn't have hired them if they weren't giving 1,000% to our families and to our students. But to the students themselves, they've all had their own path before coming to Eaton Aerosmith. So they have that compassion to what it would be like to start at a new school, but they're also very excited that this new student would be also having the opportunity to strengthen his or her cognitive capacities, to have that ability to move forward with success in school instead of having that, whether it's a niggling feeling or a full out, you know, I feel like a failure sometimes because I just cannot keep up, even though people are telling me that I'm intelligent or smart or that I should be able to do this. So what's wrong with me? And so they're embraced wholeheartedly. And within 8:30 to 3 o'clock, each student is working on his or her own very individualized program of Aerosmith program exercises. So each of them would work on 6 cognitive exercises, and which 6 are determined by an Aerosmith program initial assessment that looks at that student's learning profile, identifies their strengths, identifies the weaker areas. And unlike a lot of programs, although we celebrate strengths, we're actually excited about these weaker areas because we can actually start to physically change the capacity of this brain area so that it no longer is that barrier or weakness for the student. So everybody has their own pattern of strengths or weaknesses. So we're not going to waste anyone's time working on something that they're already very strong at. What actually starts to happen once you start to strengthen those weaker capacities is these strengths are freed up to actually properly do their own job. And Howard alluded to it when he spoke to the research that the brain networks, instead of having some that are more hyper-connected, really carrying the load of some of the other areas that are more weakly connected, now that there's more evenness across the brain networks, you see much more efficiency and effectiveness in terms of learning. So each person is going to be working on their own program of strengthening and evening out those brain networks within the course of the day. Some of the exercises are more computer-based, some are more pen and paper, some are auditory, and students will switch every 35 minutes. And throughout the whole time, they're monitored through a cloud-based data collection system, whether that's online or in school. If you came to one of our schools, and of course you're welcome to do so, might look a little different these days with all of the COVID health and safety, you know, conditions, but you're still welcome. Students would be looking to their teachers, and the teachers would have a tablet that has all of the students' names, their exercises they're working on, the goals that are set out for them, their engagement level. So you know minute to minute how someone is doing. It's wonderful for parents who feel very closely tied to our teachers and to their children in terms of how they're doing. You cannot slip through the cracks as much as our students would sometimes wish they could. We know exactly what they're doing at each moment of the day, and that enables us to really keep a very close handle on how they're doing to make sure that they're being as successful as possible. And then with our our in-school programs, students are also working on a period of language arts and a period of math as well. And the reason for choosing just those 2 subjects is, as you can imagine, those 2 are more the building block subjects that you would need for success in really anything you're going to do academically in the future. And they tend to be the ones that have the most gaps that have been created by past learning challenges. So, I mean, you can be in the 10th grade and still struggle with multiplication facts, or not understanding what a fraction is, or, you know, how to write a coherent sentence, because even though you were physically present in that class, if those brain networks were weak, it's very hard to absorb that information and retain it throughout time. So once those cognitive areas have been strengthened with their Aerosmith program exercises, teachers then have the fun job of saying, hey, now you are ready to be retaught this and have that information stick. And it was funny, last year, one of our students said, you know what, this is the year you can teach me fractions. And when I nod and say I understand it, I actually do. Because all of that other time, you know, kids and adults, we all get very good at compensating and putting on the face like we're understanding, because we don't want to be seen as anything less than, you know, our very best. But it definitely can take a real emotional toll if you're fighting that battle all of the time. So you see confidence is one of the first changes that happens as a student moves through a full-time program like that. That program, if a student is with us in a full-time program, tends to be about 3 to 4 years. And sometimes families think, wow, that's an awfully long time, but my child or myself, I only struggle with reading, or I only struggle in math, so how could it ever take that long? But you know, if you think about, our brain has a number of different brain networks that all have real interconnected responsibilities. So even the act of getting stronger at reason or at reading could take, you know, an exercise that looks at reasoning, another one that looks at processing speed, another that looks at working memory, another that looks at executive function. I could go on and on. And when you work on those all in unison, then is when you start to see kind of like the flower bloom, right? You've created the root structure, and now that flower has that opportunity to show. And that's when you start to see real tangible academic changes. So we have a full-time program. We've also got a 4-hour-a-week program that students can work on if logistically it doesn't make sense to switch schools. That often happens after school in our in-person schools. We also have an option of doing a half-day program where you do focus on the majority of the time being cognitive exercises. Of course, a school is a school. We've got our field trips, we've got our social interaction, we've got our talent show. This is not just students working in silos doing brain exercises. There's a really strong culture and community at all of our schools. And online, which is relatively new to us, but is very welcomed. People for the past 16 years have been asking us every other day, so I live across the world. Do I really have to move to you in order to access Aerosmith? And in the past, we'd have to say, yep, sorry, that's really all we can offer. And so I guess you'd call it a silver lining out of our new normal here, is that we've been able to create online programs and see them working really successfully in our students when they did have to shift quite quickly in the spring to online due to COVID. But due to that success, we're now able to offer a half-day online program, a 4-hour-a-week online program, and an 8-week intensive Aerosmith program online as well. So those are starting up. We have 9 different classes run the 8-week program in the summer, and then we've got our half-day and our 4-hour-a-week starting in September and October.
Jason, can I add just a brief comment that one of the reasons I started in Aerosmith School was that what I started recognizing is that, you know, being an Orton Gillingham trained tutor myself by one of the gurus, Vanna Hamburg King, and working at the college level with Dr. Loring Brinkerhoff at Washington University when he was there at the college learning disability support team working with college students, was that you know, we were, even though we had these interventions and these supports, not everyone benefited. So not everyone who does a phonological program actually becomes a very competent reader. Not everyone who does keyboarding can express their ideas in writing still. And not anyone who gets to high school with a learning disability or attention deficit can succeed at the university level, even with learning disability support services that, you know, I was part of once when I was at graduate school at Boston University. And so I felt that I understood that the field needed more, that there needed to be more interventions and something quite different than what was going on as standard interventions in the field. So a lot of times, and Sandra knows this, we get families who have tried everything and it's not working. Their child is still struggling in the classroom, they're not understanding information, they need tutors, they've had all the specialty tutoring, and they're still struggling. And the reason is that they have these underlying cognitive deficits that have not been addressed, and they need to be for a better quality of life outcomes.
Yeah. Thanks, Howard. Just noticing the time is 1:40 or 20 to 2, and want to make sure that people are getting an opportunity to have their questions answered. I've been answering in the chat, I think pretty consistently. One question I have not answered, and Sandra, I'm going to shoot it to you, and then Howard, I have another question for you as well. And it's the question from Aaron, and it talks about, I'm just delaying here as I actually find the exact question. Can you speak, Sandra, to the transition that teenage or college age students have going back into college or beyond?
Yeah, so it's actually timely. We've been speaking to a number of educational consultants over the past few weeks, and that's been their question as well, because they're, charged with helping families navigate that transition from high school to college or university. And unfortunately, we've helped them to understand that a lot of the struggle that a student has had making that transition has been because of underlying cognitive weaknesses. So when students do come to us, especially if they're near the end of high school, and we understand that a lot of high school students want to graduate, and have that typical path and graduate with their peers. And so that time after that, some of them, it would make more sense for them to actually come to us before that, because it feels like, they're just moving from year to year without actually getting any traction academically. But if they have finished with high school and are thinking about next steps, to spend a year, 2 years, that would be fantastic as well. But a solid year really working on strengthening those cognitive capacities. When students then move on to college and to universities, we see the same kind of pattern as we do when students go back when they go into high school or even elementary school for some of our younger students, is with any kind of transition, you have to acclimatize. It would be like if we moved to a different country, but had all of our learning faculties strong, you're still going to take time to familiarize yourself with the lay of the land, so to speak. And so we hear this when families come back and give us feedback that, the first term out, we would always encourage a student to have a support network, even to have, a tutor there, not because it's going to be hard to learn, but just in case there are any gaps or there is that anxiety about moving back to more of a traditional academic setting. That can be triggering for some students if they have struggled in the past. And then as time goes on, to remove that scaffolding, because it's truthfully no longer necessary. If you have that ability, especially that executive functioning ability when you're moving into college and university, if that is strong for you, then you can start trying that out. And that ability continues to grow because you are asked to use those new brain networks or stronger brain networks all of the time. Certainly do connect with an academic advisor. We're always happy to connect with them as well and explain what a student has been doing with us, and the fact that they, in the long run, will no longer need the kind of accommodations, or at least to the same level that they may well have needed before. But it also takes changes in parent expectations as well. I know with my own son, who is much younger, but I was of the expectation still that this guy's disorganized and struggles with getting his things together. And it's actually taken him to say at the end of each day, you know what, I've got this. I know that it's beneficial for me to get everything ready for my next day before I go to bed. And so that has allowed me to step back. But we do need to watch and temper our own expectations and get ready for what will come, as someone does transition, because you do see the brain areas continue to strengthen once they are finished with Eaton Aerosmith. Even years in the future, they continue to strengthen because life then is their new Aerosmith program exercise.
Thanks, Sandra. I think that I have everything in the chat room, the chat box, questions that have come. Aaron's has now been answered. If there are others, please throw them in there. In the meantime, Howard, I think a lot of people were wondering that if this program is so great, why is it not available widely in schools? Could you speak to that for us, please?
Yeah, I mean, I taught, at the university level and a faculty of special education. I presented at conferences, around North America on topics like transition to post-secondary education if you have a learning disability or ADHD. So I've been engaged professionally with those involved in dyslexia, post-secondary education, and transitions. And we all have our mindset, our paradigm that we're living in. And when you look at transitions to university or college for learning disabilities, it's mostly about accommodations, self-advocacy training, technology access. There's not a lot of discussion about neuroplastic intervention. You look at Landmark College and facilities that teach directly children or adults with learning disabilities in the post-secondary environment. It's all about strategies and metacognition and so on. There's not a lot of talk about brain plasticity. Interesting enough, with dyslexia, there's been a lot of great studies, Dr. Sally Shaywitz at Yale University, on how the brain changes with phonemic instruction. And that's brain plasticity. That's neuroplasticity. So the field of dyslexia understands brain plasticity. But when it comes to looking at brain plasticity for, let's say, processing speed, or working memory, visual motor integration, or areas of conceptual reasoning, like fluid intelligence, the paradigm doesn't talk about, the current paradigm in LD doesn't talk about those things. And indeed, that they can change functionality in the human brain. For example, even our large-scale brain networks, like our saliency network, default mode network, frontal parietal network, we can change that connectivity. Currently, we don't talk about those things in the field of, in the field of dyslexia or reading disability. Teachers aren't being trained in brain plasticity at university. If they're lucky, they may not, most likely they don't even get a course on the human brain if you're in teacher college. So, to bring this understanding of the Aerosmith program, for example, as one program into, say, public schools, it requires a lot of knowledge transfer, a lot of knowledge learning. And another problem, because of that, another problem as professionals, it takes a lot of effort to learn new things and to change your mind and to have an open approach to information that's coming to you, rather than just being the skeptic and embedded in your own way of thinking. So neuroplasticity can be a good thing because you can acquire new knowledge, but it can be a bad thing because you then obsess with your own insight, and it's hard to bring new ideas in. So that's why it's, Barbara's been at this for 40 plus years, has done research for most of it, originally on herself, and then really made an effort starting in 1997, so over 20 years with academics. She's not one to go out and market what she's doing, so a lot of it is sort of osmosis and word of mouth. But it's going to take a while to change our field of education, to embrace neuroscience. It is happening. Harvard University has an educational neuroscience department. University of British Columbia started one a few years ago. So they're trying to intermix the field of neuroscience and education, but it's slow. I know the research we're doing should help parents who want to advocate to get a program like this in their public school. They can get this research and download it from the Aerosmith program site, contact their school board and see if they can begin the advocacy to get programs like this in their schools. And that's one reason I really wanted to do research, was to try to get some peer-reviewed studies that parents can use to advocate in their own school boards, so that they don't have to pay a private school tuition or online tuition, that they can have some free access to it in their own public schools. And so, this is just a paradigm shift. And if anyone studied paradigm shifts, they don't happen overnight. It can take decades. And I think we're in one now. The field of learning disabilities is in a paradigm shift. I'll know when it's achieved when the Learning Disability Association of America or the Learning Disability Association of Canada doesn't include learning disabilities as a lifelong diagnosis. I'll know it's been accepted at that point.
Great. Thanks, Howard. I'm noticing it is 10 to 2, and we want to make sure that we're respectful of your time in your busy lives. A couple of things from me, just as you're thinking about this information that Howard and Sandra have shared, is that we do have in-person and online classes starting September 8th, and we have other programs, more part-time type programs starting in October, as well as an intensive program that starts mid-September. Sandra and I are able to take inquiries by email, by phone, through social media, anywhere that you can Google Eaton Aerosmith. you'll likely find one of us. Also a reminder that if you are not getting our newsletter or our updates, that we would like to send that to you, but we need permissions to do that. And Sandra can speak to that perhaps in a second. And just also, I will put our contact information in the chat box as well for you to be able to reach us easily.
I beat you to that, Jason. I put our email in there. There's admissions at Eaton Aerosmith, so do feel free to reach out. I know it's a lot of information to absorb at one time or even after 10 times of hearing it, especially when you are thinking about, you know, someone you know or yourself. So we're really happy to go through that with you and find a program that would be a best match.
Howard, 30 seconds to finish up.
I'm always grateful that people are curious. I think curiosity is a very important human trait. And I know parents and professionals, parents want the best for the kids and the professionals want the best for their client. I know Aerosmith is one of many interventions for learning disabilities. I'm a big fan of many of them, including reading programs like Linda Mood-Bell and Orton Gillingham, various math programs. I'm not against accommodations or use of technology. I think we should all see ourselves as one big community, and we should be able to explore all various options with an open mind. I'm just very grateful that Barbara Aerosmith Young, who I met over coffee in downtown Vancouver several decades ago, inspired me enough to rethink how I approached the field as a professional and also as someone living, you know, with severe dyslexia, to rethink my paradigm. And I'm grateful to parents who were the ones who inspired me to consider an alternative program that seems so far out there in my professional world, and convinced me over and over again that maybe I needed to have an open mind and think about myself as a professional. And so I'm grateful to those parents like Michelle Tom and others who reached out to me. And all I can say, it has been so rewarding to be able to watch children and adults change cognitive capacity, to see them transform in front of you over the years you work with them. We all have to remember our personality, who we are, is based on our neurological functioning. And you can see that clearly with someone who suffered a brain injury. Their relatives or spouse will say they're someone different now. They're a different person. And the reason they're different is their neurological system is different because of injury. So if you have a learning disability, you have a difference in neurological functioning. We all do, we're all different. But if you begin to change that, you begin to shift the personality to someone who's more open to learning, excited about what information they're being presented with, considering about possibilities they never hoped they had in their lives, to dream about things in their future that they didn't want to dream about before because it was all too painful. To be part of that community now, I can't tell you how moving it has been for me. And I think that's why we have staff who've been with us for 16 years instead of the rapid burnout rate of 3 years that most teachers have. It's because it's so inspiring. And I know Sandra could speak to that too, but I'm just grateful to be part of this community now.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Howard. Thank you to Sandra. Thank you to everyone participating. If you are feeling like you want more information specific to your situation, Sandra and I are happy to talk anytime. I believe that you have the information that you need to get to us via the web or phone or email. And we look forward to that.
We'll send you a follow-up email too, personally thanking you.
Yeah, thanks for your time, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.